A safety line hung over the rail of a 44-foot yacht, tied at one end, trailing empty in the water. The man it had held was gone. Tami Oldham had been unconscious for 27 hours. She was 23 years old. She had been thrown across the cabin when the boat rolled, and she had woken to silence and seawater and a wound on her head she could not remember getting. Now she stood on the deck of a broken boat, 1,500 miles from the nearest land, and she understood two things at once. She was alive, and she was completely alone. You have felt alone before. In a crowded room, in a quiet apartment, in the middle of the night when a thought won't let you sleep. But you have never been alone the way Tami Oldham was alone on October 12, 1983. There was no phone. There was no radio. There was no one within a horizon in any direction. If she died out here, no one would find the body for weeks, maybe never. And the strangest part of what happened next is that this kind of aloneness does something to the human mind that most people never discover. Because your brain was not built to be the only one. 3 weeks earlier, none of this seemed possible. Tami and her fiancé, a British sailor named Richard Sharp, were experienced. They had spent years cruising the South Pacific on Richard's own boat. When a friend offered to pay them to deliver a luxury yacht called the Hazana from Tahiti to San Diego, it sounded like a gift. A long sail across open water, the two of them, a boat worth more than they had ever owned. They left Papeete Harbor on a bright day and pointed the bow toward home, 4,000 miles away. They knew a storm was building. They did not know what it would become. Hurricane Raymond changed course faster than they expected. It grew into a Category 4 monster, with winds that would eventually reach far past 140 knots and waves that stood 40 feet tall. For 3 days they ran from it, sailing north, trying to slip around the edge. 3 days is a long time to watch a storm decide whether it will kill you. The barometer kept falling. The sky went from blue to bruised to something with no color at all. They took down sail, then more sail, then nearly all of it, and still the boat was being driven harder than either of them had ever felt a boat driven. They were two skilled sailors doing everything right. But a hurricane at sea is not a thing you outrun in a sailboat. It caught them. Richard did the thing a good sailor does. He sent Tami below deck to rest, and he clipped his own safety line to the boat, and he stayed at the helm to try to hold the yacht steady in seas that were now taller than the mast. That was the last decision he ever made. A wave the size of a building rolled the Hazana completely over. Tami was hurled across the cabin, and her head struck something hard, and the last thing she heard before the world went black was Richard's voice, screaming. Then nothing. For more than a day, nothing. When she climbed up into the light, the mast was gone. The engine was dead. The navigation instruments were smashed. And Richard's line hung over the rail, still knotted to the boat, holding no one. She called his name across an empty ocean. The ocean did not answer. Here is where most stories about survival get the danger wrong. They tell you the danger is the shark, the storm, the thirst. Those are real. But the thing that kills people adrift at sea, again and again, is not the water. It is the mind. It is what happens inside a human skull when the social world it evolved to live inside simply vanishes. For nearly all of human history, to be alone was to be as good as dead. Your ancestors survived because they belonged to a group. The group hunted together, watched for predators together, raised children together, and shared the food when one hunt failed and another succeeded. A human being cut off from other humans was a human being about to die, and your brain knows this at a level older than language. Isolation was not loneliness the way you feel it now. It was a death sentence with a delay on it. So your mind evolved to treat the absence of other people as an emergency. It fights the isolation. It does something almost unbelievable to keep you from being alone. It invents company. Tami began to talk. First to the boat, then to the sea, then to Richard, who was not there, and who answered anyway. She spoke to him in the long, quiet hours, and heard his voice guiding her, steadying her, telling her what to do next. Years later, when a film was made about her ordeal, this was the detail people found hard to believe. But it is one of the most documented things that happens to isolated survivors. Solo sailors report it. Polar explorers report it. Mountaineers alone on a ridge report a felt presence walking beside them, so real they save it a portion of food. Ernest Shackleton. Crossing the frozen mountains of South Georgia at the edge of death, was certain a fourth man walked with his party of 3, and 2 of his companions, questioned separately afterward, had felt exactly the same silent presence. Scientists now have a name for it, the third man factor, and they find it wherever human beings are pushed to the absolute edge of endurance and isolation. The mind, starved of other minds, builds one out of memory and need. It is not madness. It is the brain doing exactly what kept your species alive, refusing to let you be alone, even when you are. And that invented voice may have saved her. Because Tami had a problem that required a working mind, and grief does not run a boat. She was 1,500 miles from Hilo, Hawaii, on a yacht with no engine, and no way to call for help. What she did have was a watch and a sextant. A sextant is an old instrument, older than the electric light. You use it to measure the angle between the sun and the horizon, and from that angle, with careful math and an accurate clock, you can find your position on the empty face of the earth. Sailors crossed oceans with it for centuries before satellites existed. It is the same tool that lets ships find single islands in an ocean that covers a third of the planet, an ocean where being off by a fraction of a degree means missing your target by 100 miles and never knowing until the land you needed simply fails to appear. Tami knew how to use one. Barely. She had learned the basics, the way you learn a skill you assume you will never truly need. Now it was the only thing standing between her and a slow disappearance into open water. So she rigged a small sail from a broken pole and a scrap of canvas. She pumped the water out of the cabin by hand. And every day at noon she raised the sextant to the sun, took her reading, worked the numbers, and adjusted her course. She was navigating by the same method Captain Cook had used to find these very islands 200 years before. One wrong calculation, one drift too far in the wrong direction, and she would sail past Hawaii into thousands of miles of open Pacific, with nothing beyond it. She ate what the storm had left her, canned fruit, sardines, peanut butter, eaten straight from the jar. She rationed water carefully, because rain was not promised and the tanks would not refill themselves. She watched the horizon for a ship that never came, and the days piled up, one after another, each one identical to the last, each one a small victory that felt like nothing at all. Think about what that takes. Not the drama of a single brave moment, but the grinding, unglamorous repetition of choosing to keep going when there is no audience, no rescue in sight, no proof that any of it will matter. This is the part of survival no one romanticizes. The heroism is not the storm. The heroism is day 19, and day 20, and day 21. Doing the math again when your fiancé is dead and the sea is enormous, and you have every reason to simply stop. She did not stop. Remember that safety line? The one that hung empty over the rail on the first morning, the image she could not stop seeing. It was the emptiest thing she had ever looked at. But somewhere in those weeks it changed meaning for her. Richard had clipped himself in so that she could go below and rest. In the version of events she carried forward, he had died so that she could live. The empty line stopped being only a wound. It became a debt. And a debt to someone you love is one of the strongest reasons a human being can find to survive. On the 41st day, she saw it. A smudge on the horizon that did not move like a cloud. Land. She had done the math right. She was almost exactly where she had been trying to go. A research vessel spotted the battered yacht near the harbor at Hilo and hooked a line to it and towed her in. When the Coast Guard helped her ashore, she was thin, sunburned, her hair matted into ropes. She had crossed 1,500 miles of ocean alone, by the sun, on a broken boat, at 23 years old. She had survived the water. What took far longer to survive was the silence after it, the night she woke from dreams of being lost, the crowds she scanned for a face she would never find. Grief does not end when the rescue ship arrives. For a long time she looked for Richard in every crowd, half expecting to see him, unable to fully believe he was gone. But she lived. About 10 years later she met the man she would marry, and she had 2 children, and she built the ordinary life the ocean had nearly taken from her. And then she did the thing almost no one expected. She went back to the sea. Not to conquer it, not to prove anything, but because the water, she said, was the one place that healed her. She still wears a sextant around her neck. cast in miniature and set with a diamond. The instrument that carried her home turned into the thing she keeps closest. Here is what her story leaves you with, sitting wherever you are, surrounded by people or the easy possibility of them. You carry the same ancient wiring Tami carried. Your brain treats connection as survival because for your ancestors it was survival. That is why loneliness hurts like a physical wound. It is a signal evolved over millions of years, telling you to find your way back to other people, the way pain tells you to pull your hand from the fire. Tami Oldham heard a voice that was not there, because a mind alone will build a companion out of nothing rather than accept being alone. You will probably never be 1,500 miles from another human being. But the pull she felt, the one that made her keep talking into the silence, is the same pull working quietly inside you every day, drawing you toward the people who make you feel less alone. She woke to an empty line trailing in the water, and it told her she was the last one left. 41 days later she stepped onto solid ground, and understood that she never truly had been